We've run our series of modeling experiments and we've got some saved models over here. And we've also got some runs files. So here's our models under the models directory. Look at all those beautiful PyTorch models. And so if we look over at runs, so I ran mine on the 28th of June, 2022. Data 10%, data 20%, FNet B2, or B0, sorry, FNet B2, 10 epochs, 5 epochs, and then the same again for the different data set. How beautiful is that? So let's now visualize. We're following all the mottos here. We've experimented. I'm trying to say that in past tense now because we've run the experiments. But now it's time to visualize. So let's write down, we followed the machine learning practitioner's motto of experiment. Not grammatically correct there, but that's okay. Now, let's visualize. My goodness, that's incredibly hard to type fast 3 times in a row. There we go. Okay, so we've already viewed our experiments in TensorBoard before, and you might have already tried this out by loading the extension TensorBoard and then said, TensorBoard, hey, look at the log directory runs, which is over here. All of our model training history is saved into this directory there. So let's give this a shot. I'm going to bring this down. We're going to retype it anyway for fun, but just for reference. So we could run that cell, but just for practice. So let's view our experiments within TensorBoard from within the notebook. So load extension, TensorBoard, and then we're going to say, hey, TensorBoard, log the directory, log dir runs. Well, let's see what this comes up with. It may take a little bit to load. Oh, is it saying it's already loaded? Oh, there we go. Yeah, we could reload the extension by running this command because we've already got a TensorBoard instance above. But this is just going to load TensorBoard. And of course, depending on where you are, so if we go back to section 5, if you're running in VS Code or something like that, you might want to look up how to run TensorBoard in VS Code, which is another popular place to write machine learning code or code in general. However, since we're using Jupyter and Colab notebooks, we've made sure that TensorBoard is installed. That comes installed on Google Colab by default. And then we're running the load extension TensorBoard magic. And then we can view our TensorBoard logs with TensorBoard logdir and then directory name with logs. And then if we wanted to publish our experiments publicly, you could do so on tensorboard.dev. We'll have a look at that in a second. So here we go. Wonderful. We've got a TensorBoard instance here. We've got our accuracy and loss. How about we just look at the test values? So, oh, look at that. All of our modeling experiments automatically loaded. How beautiful is that? And we can turn smoothing off to see the absolute values. Or we could keep it there, maybe at 0.5. That should be enough. See, I'm not the biggest fan of smoothing. I like to see absolute values, but we'll just keep it there for the sake of it. Now, if we scale this out, what do we have here? Look how many experiments there are. There's that extra one. We might get rid of that. So we're only after the ones that are prefixed with today's date, which is the 28th of June in my case. So if we go right to the end here, what do we get? We get some different values. So you can see how long each one of those experiments took. The longest one there took about a minute, which is using the most amount of data. So data 20%, I can't scroll and highlight it because if I go off, it's going to remove it. But if you look at the dark blue dot, which is second from the bottom there, we've got data 20%, FNet B2, 10 epochs, accuracy test AC. We finish up with just under 95% test accuracy. Oh my goodness. Ladies and gentlemen, we have a new best performing model, and that took 10 epochs. It took about a minute. So the other models aren't very far off though. Like the one on the very bottom, the green dot, trained for half the training time, but only was just over a percentage point lower in the value, so the accuracy there, and it took half the training time. So that's something you'll have to think about. That's the reason why we trained with different model sizes, different amounts of data, and different amounts of training time, so that you could see there is a trade-off between performance and speed. So our model that trained for the longest with the most amount of data, with the biggest number of parameters, so EfficientNet B2, took a minute to train and ended up with 95% test accuracy. That is incredible. That's what we're after. So let's now have a look at the loss. We'll just zoom out here. So we've got 8 values for 8 different models. We'll go right to the end. Now I'm looking at the value column here. Which model has the lowest loss? Well, it looks like the gray dot has the lowest loss. Or what's this dark blue dot? Oh, okay. So the model with the lowest loss is actually EfficientNet B0 for 10 epochs. It's finished up with 2.2856 loss, and it took about a minute or 51 seconds or so to train. Now, the second lowest loss was the gray dot here. I'm just going to highlight that. Was twice the amount of data, so data 20%. EfficientNet B2, 10 epochs. We have a loss value of 0.01 or thereabouts, or 0.1, higher than the dark blue dot here. So it looks like the model with, are you noticing a trend here? So it looks like across all of our experiments here, it looks like the model's trained with the bigger data set and the bigger model and the longer training time turned out to have the best results. Now, does that make sense after what we've talked about? So generally in machine learning, the bigger your model, the more data you have, and the longer you can train for, up until a point, because it gets to a point where more training doesn't really help, the better your model will go. So I'm happy to take EfficientNet B2, the one I've highlighted here, with data 20% and 10 epochs, has the second lowest test loss, but it has the highest test accuracy. So if we go find that blue dot, there we go. We'll take that model because it's got a better trade-off here. If we were to take the second best or the best performing test loss, we get a little bit of a degradation in accuracy. So let's take the best performing model as being EfficientNet B2, this one here, the dark blue dot, data 20% and 10 epochs. So that's how beautiful TensorBoard is. And then if we wanted to only look at the models that train for 10 epochs, we could do this, 10 epochs. So we've got 10 epochs, and then, or maybe you could even do only look at the ones with data 20%. And then you could even put in a clause there that'll only show data 20%, 5 epochs. You can put in regex here if you wanted to really filter them, but I usually focus on the test data set and then explore my different models from there. So let's say here, the best performing model was the one with the experiment that had the most amount of variables. So the most data, the biggest model, and the highest number of epochs, which isn't too much of a surprise based on what we've talked about in the past. We had model was FNet B2, and then we had data set was pizza, steak, sushi, 20%, and then we had epochs was 10. And the overall trend of all the results was that more data, bigger model, and longer training time led to better results, or generally led. I always say generally because it's not always the case, but usually it does. Led to better results. Now, this might give you an idea of what experiments you could run next. If our best performing model so far was EfficientNet B2, on the data set of pizza, steak, sushi 20% and for 10 epochs, potentially you scale this up even more now. You could go to B4 and you could double this, so you could do 40% or 50% of the data, and you could maybe do 50 epochs instead of 10. It's all up to you, but this is just to give you an idea of the types of experiments you could run. And so one last thing to finish off is, say you had your experiments in a notebook and you wanted to share them publicly with your friend or with your colleague or something like that. TensorBoard.dev is a free way to do that, baked within TensorBoard. So let's see how we can upload our experiments to to TensorBoard.dev. So if you come into here, this is PyTorch experiment tracking, view experiments in TensorBoard. We've gone through this. And if we go here, I'm going to copy this cell here, which is TensorBoard dev upload. Now, this has come directly from this website, TensorBoard dev upload. There we go. Very similar code here. You can read through this if you'd like a little bit more on TensorBoard.dev. Just a note that these results will be public if we upload them. So just be careful if you upload anything to TensorBoard.dev, make sure it's not sensitive data. Otherwise, it will be publicly viewable. So we're going to call this dev upload logdir runs, which is just the directory we've been viewing in TensorBoard. We're going to give it a name, PyTorch experiment tracking, food vision mini results from the video. And the description is comparing results of different model size, training data, data amount, and training time. So I'm going to run this, and then it's going to ask me for an authorization code. So I'm just going to put in yes here. So I'm going to visit this URL. So I'm just going to pause the video, visit this URL, put the code in so that my code isn't publicly available. I'm back. So I put in my code. Oh, there we go. It's there. So I'm just going to make sure that I blur this out, but it shouldn't be too bad because it's only a one-off code. It'll only work one time. So it's going to upload all of the results that are in the runs directory because that's what we've put here. Runs. And maybe it is. Well, let's just have a look at our experiment, hey? It should be publicly available at this link. So let's have a look. No data found. Let's reload. Oh, there we go. Total uploaded, 260 scalars. There we go, skipped. So if we come back here, I think if we refresh this, wonderful. So we can just go test, and there we get all of our data there. And if you go to this URL, I'm just going to link it in here so it's saved. Again, that authorization code shouldn't matter too much because it's a one-off code. But let me just put this down here. You can view the experiments publicly at TensorBoard.dev. There we go. Turn that into Markdown cell, and that's all of our experiments there. Now, just a little caveat, don't worry too much if your numbers aren't the exact same. As we've discussed before, the randomness of machine learning and deep learning will mean that numbers will vary very slightly. What you should be paying more attention to is the trends of your results. So we've viewed our experiments in TensorBoard and TensorBoard.dev. Now, how about we import the best performing model, specifically EfficientNet B2, data 20%, 10 epochs, and make some predictions or some visualized predictions. Oh, I've gone to the wrong directory on the test data. So let's do that in the next video. I'll see you there.